Instant healing through the high self is the next topic that will be covered in this series chapter of the book titled The Secret Science Behind Miracles by Max Freedom Long. If you are new to my channel, welcome. I am Daisy, your hostess. Glad you found me. Make sure to visit my playlist to access the previous chapters of this video series. And to my family, friends, and subscribers, welcome back. I mentioned in the previous video that I would share a personal testimonial regarding healing. And I've already shared my personal experience as a firewalker. I must say, I am no Kahuna. I don't follow any cults. I've been disappointed with the politics of organized religion. Having served as a mayor for my city here in Lake Helen, Florida, I've come to understand that where there are groups of people, each with selfish personal interest, one could consider them a form of organized politics. And in that respect, religious organizations are no different. One would have to be in the belly of the whale to have access to that type of knowledge. But those individuals who are part of the inner administration, whether government or religious, with access to the internal memos, sworn by contract or oath not to reveal such secrets for penalty of what? Maybe losing their jobs or excommunication, or who knows what God-fearing threats have been imposed on them. They will never speak out, even though they know that they are part of the group trying to convince the crowd that the emperor is wearing clothes. In the meantime, the king's ego gets in the way and makes him prance around naked. The truth is for those with eyes to see and ears to hear, or rather, who dare approach life with the innocence of a child and common sense, and dare to speak out loud. Oh, hark! The emperor is naked. Nonetheless, I do believe, speaking for myself that is, because of a near-death experience that I had over 20 years ago, this revealed to me an infinite, loving energy that permeates all of eternity, and that is just for lack of better words, because truly, what I experienced in that gap when the paramedics were trying to resuscitate me is ineffable. I imagine that the ancient Kahunas, and possibly the current Hawaiians that have chosen to go back to those ancient roots, that this is the force that they speak of, the energy that the great Kahunas tap into. I personally can say that what happened to me not only once, but 3 times was short of miraculous. And, maybe what this author is saying, that there is a science to the miracles. My first experience with this, for lack of better words, this divine intervention, happened over 30 years ago. I will be as brief as possible. Needless to say, I had developed a tumor in my throat the size of a golf ball. Upon my mother's consternation and needle probing by the doctor, who landed us a blow that it was cancerous, I decided to use up some sick days and vacation time from work, and I reevaluated my life. I called my grandma, who suggested I added coconut water to my diet. Yes, I am from Caribbean roots. I then disconnected the phone. I disconnected myself from people. I spent 2 weeks at the beach, swimming in the salt water and taking in the sun rays. I reflected on the association of the tumor in my throat and my connection with speaking my truth. After 2 weeks, the tumor dissolved. I didn't see a reason to go back to the doctor and went about my happy life. Since then, I've had 2 other miraculous experiences, and I will spare you the details, only to say that what you will hear in this chapter regarding instant healing is worth listening. I believe that the ancient Kahunas didn't believe. They simply knew. And with that, I now turn the page. The Secret Science Behind Miracles by Max Freedom Long. Instant healing through the high self, the proofs and methods. At the Christian shrine at Lourdes, doctors have examined those who have come hoping to be healed. For over 50 years, records have been kept of those who have been healed. These records detail the afflictions, give the time consumed in the healing, and the condition after healing. There are 2 kinds of miraculous healing. The first is so rapid that it may be called instant healing. In a matter of seconds, or at most minutes, the diseased or deformed parts of tissues of the bodies are changed to healthy, normal ones. The second kind of healing is like the first, except that the process of replacing abnormal tissues may take a few days. It seems to depend upon a great speeding up of normal healing processes. Those who come to pray for others rather than for themselves, seem more apt to be healed than those who pray for themselves alone. Nearly all the ills common to man have been healed in this way. Cancers have vanished, deformed bones have been straightened, sight and hearing have been restored. The list is blessedly long. Case 20. A kahuna heals a broken bone instantly. Preliminary notes. Religion explains the miracle by saying that God, or a saint, or other superhuman being performs the miracle of instant healing. But, as in the case of firewalking and seeing the future and changing it, only the kahunas have offered detailed explanations of how such things are accomplished. Our one and only hope of learning to get miracles performed by the higher beings as a matter of daily occurrence in any place lies in close study and understanding of the beliefs and practices of the kahunas. It may well be objected that praying Christians and mental healers sometimes get miraculous cures of both body and purse. This is happily true. But they do not get them with certitude. There are a million failures to one successful demonstration. While the kahunas did not always succeed in gaining the help of a high self each time they asked, their average of success was so high that there can be little comparison. Dr. Brigham was fortunate enough to be able to study several cases of instant healing performed by kahunas, but the most simple case to come to my attention was the following. The case. My close and trusted friend J.A.K. Combs of Honolulu, who is a fellow student of kahuna lore and who has given me much invaluable aid, had for a grandmother-in-law one of the most powerful women kahunas in the islands. She loved Combs and told him many things about her secret knowledge, her power, and her practices. On the occasion in question, Combs attended a beach party at her country home. Many guests had arrived when a car drove up to the edge of the beach and several Hawaiians got out. Among them was a man who was slightly intoxicated. He missed his step from car to soft sand and fell. As he fell, there was the characteristic snapping sound of breaking bones. Inspection showed a compound fracture of the left leg just above the ankle. The bone ends pressed visibly out against the skin. Combs, who had heard the familiar sound of breaking bones and had himself suffered such a break, realized the seriousness of the injury and proposed that the man be taken at once to Honolulu for treatment. But the elderly kahuna arrived on the scene and took over. Kneeling beside the injured man, she straightened the foot and leg, pressing on the place where the ends of the broken bones pushed out of the skin, and then began a low, chanted prayer for healing. In a short time, she fell silent. Those who stood about watching tensely could see nothing until her hands suddenly moved on the man's leg and she took them away, saying quietly in Hawaiian, "The healing is finished. Stand up. You can walk." The injured man, now entirely sobered, rose wonderingly to his feet, took a step, and then another. The healing was complete and perfect. The leg showed no indication of the break in any way. Comment. The kahuna explanation of instant healing is one which involves 1. A high self with a superior form of mentality and with ability to do the work. 2. The high voltage of vital force or mana, natural to all high selves and used in all miraculous works. And 3. The flesh, bone, and blood, technically these are all known as bodily tissues, of the injured limb, taking the case above as an example, and the aka, or shadowy body of the patient, particularly that part of which duplicated the broken section of the leg. The shadowy body of the low self is a mold of every cell of the body, also of its general shape, so the kahunas believed. To heal a broken bone, the high self dissolved the injured bone and other tissues into ectoplasm, this usually being invisible but not always, as the shadowy body mold is made of invisible etheric substance. It cannot be broken or injured, Thus, with the mold of the normal leg there at hand, the ectoplasmic material of the dissolved parts is re-solidified in the mold, with the result that the healing is instant and the limb is restored to its former condition. This explanation applies equally to all healing in which abnormal conditions of deformity or disease prevail. If there is a cancer, it is changed to ectoplasmic substance and then made into normal tissue to fill the mold of that part of the body as it was before the cancer developed. While the Kahuna explanation is simple to state in general terms, it must be noted that there are certain conditions which must be made right, if they exist, before healing is granted. There must be no complex doubt or conviction of sin or guilt that has not been cleared away. What has been called faith is a condition of freedom from any hindering complex. The complex or fixation of ideas was referred to by one Kahuna as the thing eating inside. It is a belief or conviction held by the low self. It may or may not be a correct belief. Once it is fixed or lodged in the memory of the low self, it is difficult to find and more difficult to remove. Modern psychology, fortunately, has explored the subconscious and found the complex, making it unnecessary to go to great lengths to prove that the Kahunas were right in believing that such things existed and caused trouble. One thing, however, which modern psychology has not yet learned, but which the Kahunas knew to their profit, is the fact that all efforts to remove a complex will be far more successful if those efforts include a combination of logical appeal to the patient's conscious self, mild suggestion, and the use of physical stimulus to accompany the administering of suggestion. The low self is so accustomed to having the middle self think of imaginary things that anything resembling an imagining is paid scant attention. The low self is best impressed by real and tangible things. For instance, the water used in religious ceremonies to wash away sins is something tangible and therefore impressive to the low self. The Kahunas have used water in ceremonial washing of the patient while giving the spoken suggestion that all sins are being washed away. They have used many other physical stimuli for perhaps 10,000 years. Proof that the broken bone, in the case given above, was dissolved into invisible etheric substance or ectoplasm and then made solid again as bone in the unbroken mold of the shadowy body, such proof is difficult to give because nothing is to be seen by the observer. For this reason, it is necessary to call attention to the findings of spiritualism and psychical research. For these we find visible and tangible bodily tissues and other substances which have been seen to vanish into nothingness and to reappear, a process called dematerialization and materialization. Little need to be said about the verification of these findings. So many cases have been verified by trained investigators that it is no longer possible to deny the actuality of the phenomena touched upon in this part of the study of Kahuna beliefs. Case 21. Proof through apports. Preliminary notes. Because of the inability of science to explain the phenomena of spiritualism, it has been customary for the press and schools to ignore them. For this reason, the average person knows little or nothing of such phenomena. Take the matter of apports. These are volumes of detailed reports covering instances in which objects have appeared or disappeared in a way quite contrary to the accepted laws of physics. At Stanford University, there are a number of cases filled with apported objects produced as from the void by spirits attending the seances of the famous apport medium Bailey. And yet, these amazing happenings are kept from the public at large. An apport is something which is dissolved into invisible form at one spot, is carried to a desired place, and solidified to the original state. Spirits of the dead are usually associated with the process. It has been said, by way of objection, that the spirit of a dead man could not do things a living man cannot do. This objection is logical enough to throw the unsound present theories of psychical research into a turmoil, but not the theories of the Kahunas. The Kahunas put forth the belief that the spirits of the dead, just as do the spirits of the living in the body, sometimes gain contact with a high self and get to use the high voltage of vital force to dematerialize and later rematerialize the substance contained in the shadowy body mold of the apported object. It was believed by the Kahunas that all things had a shadowy body. We know that when the voltage of an electric current or discharge is sufficiently high in atom-smashing machines, various elements are transmuted and become other elements. Knowing this, we may agree that the mana or electrical vital force in man, when stepped up to the highest voltage, can be used to change visible matter to the invisible form and back again to the visible. In making such changes, so we are told by science, there would be generated great heat and cold. But as the high self is able to control temperature changes in firewalking, it would have no difficulty in exerting a similar control in causing the apporting of objects and things. Living creatures have been frequently used as apports and have ranged from tiny insects through birds, fish, beasts, and men. Hot objects have been apported and remained hot upon their arrival. The cases. A. Ernesto Bozano, one of the most famous psychical research leaders, reported an apport case which will well illustrate the matters under discussion. In March 1904, in a sitting in the house of Cavalieri Peretti, in which the medium was an intimate friend of ours, gifted with remarkable psychical mediumship, and with whom apports could obtain at command, I begged the communicating spirit to bring me a small block of pyrites, which was laying on my writing table over a mile away. The spirit replied, through the mouth of the entranced medium, that the power was almost exhausted, but that all the same he would make the attempt. Soon after, the medium sustained the usual spasmodic twitchings which signified the arrival of an apport, but without hearing the fall of any object on the table or on the floor. We asked for an explanation from the spirit operator, who informed us that although he had managed to disintegrate a portion of the object desired and had brought it into the room, there was not enough power for him to be able to reintegrate it. He added, "Light the light." We did so, and found to our great surprise that the table, the clothes, and hair of the sitters, as well as the furniture and carpet of the room, were covered with the thinnest layer of brilliant, impalpable pyrites. When I returned home after the sitting, I found the little rock of pyrites lying on my writing table. Missing from it was a large fragment, about 1/3 of the whole piece, which had been scooped out. B. A medium named Mrs. Guppy, who was a woman of wealth and note in the early days of spiritualism, gave a sitting with her friends for Henry W. Longfellow in Italy. At the sitting, a block of ice over a foot square was brought as an apport and dropped with a crash on the table. At a second sitting, while the famous poet was holding both the medium's hands, several oranges were apported. At still another sitting, in which the spirit spoke through the medium and asked what things were desired, the following items were apported: a banana, 2 oranges, a bunch of white grapes, a bunch of black grapes, a cluster of filberts, 3 walnuts, half a dozen damsons, a slice of candied pineapple, an onion, a peach, some almonds, 3 figs, 2 apples, 4 very large grapes, a potato, and several other objects. At still another sitting, there were apports of pots of scalding hot tea and sizzling pans of frying eggs. Mrs. Guppy herself was brought as an apport from her own home to that of a friend. The distance was over a mile, and Mrs. Guppy was very stout. C. In 1926, at the British College of Psychic Science, Mrs. Barkle, a medium, saw the shadow of a bunch of violets near an electric light globe overhead. That evening, in the same room, at a sitting with a port medium, Heinrich Melzer, a quantity of violets dropped from an empty air onto the table. D. One of the most famous and most studied mediums of the past century was Madame L'Espérance. A spirit called Yolandi frequently appeared, fully materialized as a pretty Arab girl, in good light, and produced apports so that the sitters could observe all that was to be seen in the process. On June 28, 1890, she brought as an apport a rare golden lily measuring more than 7 feet from roots to top and carrying 11 perfect flowers. Toward the end of the sitting, she tried to dematerialize the plant to take it away, but the force was too weak by then and she failed. She asked that it be kept in a dark closet until she could try again. The plant had been borrowed, so she said, and had to be returned. At 9:30 on July 5th, the plant was removed from the dark closet and placed in the center of the circle of sitters. Almost instantly it vanished. Another spirit, not Yolandi, explained that the plant, in its invisible form, had been brought into the room at the first sitting, fully an hour before it was solidified and became visible. Comment. In the above cases may be seen the mention of power or force similar to that suggested by the Kahunas. The spirits undoubtedly had access to beings able to use this power to produce apports, and as the living cannot produce apports, it is to be concluded that the dead must have aid from some superior being. The shadowy body of the apported objects has been seen at times, filmy, but having the form of the apport. In some instances, the thinly massed cloud of material is seen, suggesting that in its disintegrated condition, the substance of the apport may be slightly visible and, of course, greatly expanded. There is no injury done plants, insects, animals, or people when they are used as apports, even when brought from a distance and passed through sealed doors into the seance room. By comparison, the use of the same process to heal a broken bone is but a trifling matter. While the Kahunas were not able to give a detailed explanation of how the high selves use the high voltage of vital force to control temperature or to dematerialize and rematerialize apports, they were very sure that this force was used and that it was nearly always provided by the living. They were also sure that the shadowy body was always an important part of the process. People who have been used as apports report either a short period of unconsciousness or a similar period in which the senses and mental faculties seem sharpened and quickened to a remarkable degree. However, they report little physical sensation during the course of the changes. This evidence tends to verify the Huna theory that we have in our low, shadowy body a duplicate set of all the organs and tissues, and that these function when we are temporarily out of the body, as in apporting cases, or after death when we are permanently out of the body. The Secret Science Behind Miracles by Max Freedom Long. Raising the dead permanently and temporarily. The dead can be raised. There are two kinds of raising, however. One, a complete restoration of life in the physical body. The other, a temporary materialization of a physical body for a departed spirit to use. In both these cases, we find proofs of the correctness of the ancient beliefs of the Kahunas. We have accounts of men being permanently raised from the dead in Christian and other religious literature. The Kahunas were able, under certain conditions, to demonstrate such feats and also to explain them in a comprehensible fashion. The temporary raising of a living body for the use of a spirit of the dead was common in Polynesia, and as materialization has been studied and repeatedly verified in psychical research. Case 22. A Kahuna raises the dead before Dr. Brigham. Preliminary notes. It takes but a short time in a warm climate like that of Hawaii for a dead body to begin to decay. However, there is a condition of deep trance or coma which so closely resembles death that there is a grave danger of being mistaken for dead if in such a condition, and of being buried alive. The Kahunas believed that decay could not set in until the shadowy body of the low self was entirely withdrawn from the body. The two spirits of the lower man can be out of the physical body in their shadowy bodies and can travel to a great distance, as is done in astral travel. But there is always a connecting thread, the silver cord of theosophy, of shadowy material joining the physical body and the low shadowy body. It is only when this thread is broken that decay sets in. After the connecting thread is broken, it would take an act of the high self to restore tissues which had begun to decay and make possible the return to life of the one who had died. On the other hand, if the thread is unbroken, as is often the case when death comes without an injury to the tissues, as in drowning, life may be restored if a return to the body is made possible for the spirits. The shadowy body of the low self, as has already been explained, is an ideal storage place for vital force. And when the spirits leave the physical body, most of the vital force is taken along in the shadowy body. When the dense physical body is left behind, after the removal of the elements of consciousness and vital force from it, unconsciousness and inaction result. Studies made of patients suffering from epilepsy show that after the characteristic cry and fall, there's no action of either body waves or brain waves as measured by recording instruments. The indication is that the two selves of the patient in their shadowy bodies have been driven out of the body temporarily or as an alternate possibility. The two selves have remained in the body but have been robbed of the last vestige of vital force by a spirit of the obsessing type. Consciousness returns to the patient in about the length of time required to rebuild the supply of vital force. The case. Dr. Brigham, during one of his field trips in search of rare indigenous plants in Hawaii, took refuge in a coastal village during a very severe storm. In the storm, a native lad about 16 was drowned. All efforts to revive him failed, and a kahuna living some distance away was summoned. The kahuna, an old man, arrived and began work about 8 hours after the accident. The boy's body was cold, and when examined by Dr. Brigham shortly before the arrival of the kahuna, seemed to have begun to stiffen in rigor mortis. The kahuna sat down near the body and set to work to use his psychic powers to learn what had become of the lad's two spirits. In this work, as he later explained, he had the help of several spirit friends. The shadowy body cord must still have connected the body to the lower self of the lad, although probably stretched to the breaking point. The boys' selves were found wandering in a confused state and brought back to the body, being urged to remain there and make every possible effort to re-enter it. The body was warmed, and while the kahuna applied his hands to it, he gave of his own vital force. He also used verbal suggestion to cause the return into the body, using as a physical stimulus a stroking and squeezing, as if the spirits were re-entering by way of one of the big toes and was being squeezed up the leg into the body. The kahuna also invoked the God, High Self, asking for aid. After about an hour, he announced that the spirits of the boy were entering the body. Gradually, the flesh became warmer, the heart began to beat, and the boy opened his eyes. The recovery was so rapid that in a short time he was asking for food. Dr. Brigham, greatly impressed by the demonstration of kahuna magic, asked many questions of the kahuna, learning little beyond the fact that the god, whose aid had been given, was one of the Aumakuas, or parental and greatly trustworthy spirits who have formerly been men living in the bodies on earth. He kept track of the Hawaiian lad for a number of years, and there seemed to never to have been appreciable after effects from the death by drowning. Comment. The aid of spirits who have once been men and women in the flesh is no new thing. The annals of spiritualism and psychical research are filled with accounts of successful healing of the living through ministrations of the spirit dead. The most successful of these spirit healers often speak of their work being done by prayers to higher spirits or the conventional concept of God. The spirits, like the living, have no way to make direct contact with the level of consciousness one step above, and can only speculate about the high beings and their form of meditation which enables them to use a mysterious power for magical healing. Many spirits have given their ideas of the mechanisms by which healing is accomplished, but even when they claim to have exact knowledge, no two of them agree. They are amusingly like the living, each evolving his own explanation and rejecting all others. In the face of the sharp contradictions found in the explanations given by the spirits of the dead, we do well to fall back on the ancient explanations given by the Kahunas, for they are correct in all details so far as we're able to check them with our present limited knowledge, and what is more important, they work as a basis for practical application. Case 23. Raising the dead temporarily, full materialization. Preliminary notes. Nothing in psychical research has been so fascinating, so incredible, so violently denied, if futilely, so inexplicable or so deeply significant as full materialization or the temporary raising of the dead. In raising the dead, as the process applies to the spirits of those long since passed over, there is the same need for the various elements which constitute a normal living man. The low and middle spirits of the deceased individual come to a spiritualistic seance. They furnish the element of consciousness. They live in the combined low and middle shadowy bodies, so bring these with them and thus furnish a mold of the physical body which they once had on the earth level. What the high self lacks is the former physical body and its naturally large charge of vital force. To supply this lack, vital force and physical matter are drawn from the circle of living sitters. The physical matter is changed to the thin ectoplasmic form and then solidified in the mold of the spirit's low, shadowy body. This results in a full materialization of an actual living, breathing, warm, and completely normal physical body with the two spirits' residents inside it. Such bodies have repeatedly stood close medical inspection. However, they are not permanent. In from a minute to seldom more than an hour, the ectoplasmic material is returned to the living and the solid form vanishes. It is conceivable that such a materialized body might be permanent if borrowed physical substance did not have to be returned. The second coming of Jesus might thus be accomplished were some devotee willing to step out of the flesh into the life of the departed and give his body to be used in this way to fill the mold of the shadowy body of the great teacher. In one of the Pacific Islands a few years ago, there was quite a furor caused by a group of Polynesian natives who held secret seances at night and succeeded in getting a dead chief raised by the process of materialization. This chief, who had died a leper, was very wise and much loved. Oddly enough, he materialized and remained in the body for much longer periods than is common in the West. Because the authorities feared that the natives would be stirred to rebellion by the chief, the excuse was made that the materialization might spread leprosy, and the seances were broken up. The cases. A. The Kahunas and mass materialization in Hawaii. In Hawaii, where the Kahunas were the most powerful workers in psychic phenomena, mass materializations have been reported down the years. Usually a native chief with from 10 to 50 of his followers, all long dead, materialize at night and march through the countryside. Often they materialize drums and torches. Sometimes they remain invisible, but the sound of marching feet and the drums and voices may be clearly heard. These ghostly processions are well known in Hawaii, have often been well substantiated, and many times described in books and articles about the islands. Dr. John Tanner, who studied the Kahunas in Hawaii for some time, told me that he was at Waikiki Beach one night when he heard the ghostly marchers in procession moving toward the center of Honolulu. He guessed that they might be following the route described as usual by the older Hawaiians, that from Waikiki to the royal tombs near the old missionary church at the center of the city. Taking his car, he drove to the old church and waited. In a surprisingly short time, the same sounds of marching feet became audible, also soft chanting and low conversation. The sounds seemed to be swallowed up by the tomb of a native king long dead. In the churchyard, Dr. Tanner saw nothing. Dr. Brigham had many first-hand accounts of seeing visible marchers by torchlights and moonlight. The Hawaiians agree that the fully materialized marchers, armed with war clubs and spears, are dangerous to anyone who interferes with them. If such a procession is seen to approach, the wise native gets out of the way, or hides himself and remains very quiet while watching it pass. There are several accounts of men having been killed by such marchers. One Hawaiian of my acquaintance claimed to have run face to face into a small group of such marchers, all armed and garbed in feather cloaks. One warrior rushed at him with a spear, but he instantly called out that he was a living relative and a friend. He was given time to tell his name and to recite the names of his ancestors. It was almost inevitable that, traced back a few generations, he should come to a family relation with any former citizen of these parts, and he did. He was pardoned for his accidental intrusion into the line of march and set on his way. While it is evident that much fiction has been added to the commonly accepted facts concerning the ghostly processions in Hawaii, I have no doubt that the basic facts are true. Legendary lore of the Polynesians is filled with accounts of mass and single materializations. The gods help the spirits of the dead to materialize, and it is related that vital force and substance for ectoplasm are borrowed from the living while they sleep, or on rare occasions are taken from animal and plant life. B. A bishop materializes after 400 years of death. Carlo Mirabelli, a South American medium of Italian blood, provided excellent examples of nearly all types of psychic phenomena. Dr. Fodder writes, Mirabelli's phenomena of materialization were astounding. The figures were not only complete, they were not only photographed, but medical men made minute examinations which lasted sometimes as long as for 15 minutes and stated that the newly constituted human beings had perfect anatomical structure. After the examination was completed, the figure began to dissolve from the feet upwards, the bust and arms floating in the air. One of the doctors exclaimed, "But this is too much," and rushed forward and seized half of the body. The next moment he uttered a shrill cry and sank unconscious to the ground. On returning to consciousness, he only remembered that when he had seized the phantom, it had felt as if his fingers were pressing a spongy, flaccid mass of substance. Then he received a shock and lost consciousness. For 36 minutes in broad daylight, the materialization of the little daughter of Dr. Souza, who died of influenza, was visible to all the sitters. She appeared in her grave clothes. Her pulse was tested. Father and child were photographed. Then the phantom raised itself and floated in the air. In another sitting, Mirabelli announced that he saw the body of Bishop Dr. Jose de Carmago Barros, who lost his life in a shipwreck. A sweet smell of roses filled the room. The medium went into a trance. A fine mist was seen in the circle of sitters. The mist, glowing as if of gold, parted, and the bishop materialized, with all the robes and insignia of office. He called his own name. Dr. Souza stepped to him. He palpitated the body, touched his teeth, tested the saliva, listened to the heartbeat, investigated the working of the intestines, nails, and eyes, without finding anything amiss. Then the other attending persons convinced themselves of the reality of the apparition. The bishop bent smilingly over Mirabelli and looked at him silently. Then he slowly dematerialized. At the 6th sitting, Mirabelli, tied and sealed, disappeared from the room and was found in another room, still in trance. All seals on doors and windows were found in order, as well as the seals on Mirabelli himself. Once among 14 investigators, his arms dematerialized. On the photograph, only a slight shadow is visible. C. Yolandi and her materializations. Madame Elizabeth d'Esperance, a famous medium, had among other spirits who materialized at her seances an Arab girl of 15 named Yolandi. This girl would appear as a mist and take several minutes to become fully materialized. Then, in good light, she was accustomed to talk with the living and to make objects in the room appear and disappear. She produced apports in great numbers and caused plants to grow in water bottles filled with water and sand, a large plant being grown in a few minutes. The medium was found by the investigator Alexander N. Askakoff on one occasion to have dematerialized the lower half of her body, while visible spirit materializations were in the seance room. The upper half of the medium seemed to be suspended in air. She was not in trance and was frightened to discover her condition, calling the investigators' attention to the situation. Others present also assured themselves that there was nothing in the collapsed garments of the medium below the waist. 10 years later, Aksakov published a weighty opinion which years of study and observation had forced upon him. The opinion that, in some cases at least, the body of the medium is entirely absorbed for the production of apparitions. D. Animal materializations. The Kahuna contention that all things have shadowy bodies which are molds of their microscopic parts as well as their full form and shape applies to animals as well as men, also insects and inert objects such as rocks. Gambier Bolton had a peculiar experience. He had befriended and doctored a wounded seal at a zoo, but the seal had died. 10 days after its death, at a seance with Mrs. Craddock and with a number of men of science present, a seal, seemingly the one known to Bolton, materialized and flapped its way across the room, staying close to Bolton for several minutes. The spirits officiating at the seance were asked to explain this. They said, their actions, those of animals at seances where they materialize, are altogether independent of us. Whilst we are busily engaged in conducting our experiments with human entities who wish to materialize in your midst, the animal get into the room in some way which we do not understand and which we cannot prevent. Obtain from somewhere sufficient matter with which to build up temporary bodies, coming just when they choose, roaming about the room just as they please, and disappearing just when it suits them, and not before, and we have no power to prevent this so long as the affection existing between them and their late owners is so strong as it was in the instances which have come under our notice. Dr. Fodder points out that the above statement from the medium's spirit controls seems contradicted by the fact that in the famous animal materializations at the Clusi seances, there invariably appeared a human apparition acting as keeper of such animals as appeared. The keepers and animals seldom moved about at the same time, but the keepers, although still, were to be plainly seen. However, there was one animal which appeared with no keeper. It was an ape man, spoken of by the investigators as Pithecanthropus. It had coarse, shaggy hair, smelled like a cross between a deer and a wet dog, and was frolicsome, evidently of a low level of intelligence, but gentle and ready to obey. Its great strength caused fear at a few of these sittings at which it appeared. It lifted heavy men, seated in their chairs high above the heads of others. It picked up a large and very heavy case of books and carried it about the room, also a large sofa. It made only smacking sounds and scratched itself frequently. Dogs, cats, parrots, bats, weasels, and many other dead pets have returned to visit their former owners at seances. Hairs from one small pet animal were left behind in some lace in which its leg had been entangled during the appearance. The lace had been torn 4 inches. These hairs were placed in a light, tight, and damp-proof box and were inspected often. After a few days, the hairs dwindled in size and before long vanished entirely, evidently dematerializing much more slowly than had the little animal itself. E. Partial materializations of the living. A number of instances have been reported by investigators in which the living had appeared at seances in partial materializations. Horace Leaf saw the head, shoulders, and one arm of a relative alive living 400 miles distant. A conversation was carried on which matters known only to themselves were discussed for several minutes. Alfred Val Peters, in a seance with Cecil Husk, saw the materialization, apparently almost complete, of a living friend who, it was later learned, had been asleep at his home at the time. Dr. Nander Fodor, in his long article on materialization in his Encyclopedia of Psychic Science, made a comment which bears strongly on the ancient theories of the Kahunas, unknown to Dr. Fodor at the time of writing. Indeed, one is tempted to speculate whether it would be possible to build up, through the process of dematerialization and materialization, a living organism on altered lines. Perhaps some of the miraculous cures in which organic parts of the body have been restored will find an explanation in the future along such speculative lines. F. Changes in normal size in materialization. Many reports have included the appearance of materialized forms which were either larger or smaller than it is supposed the living person had been. This is similar to the phenomenon of elongation of the living mediums at seances, in which the medium's body has been seen to become longer by as much as 2 feet. The Kahunas believed that the shadowy body of a thing could be made larger or smaller. Madame Bizon studied a snake female figure not more than 8 inches tall, which repeatedly materialized, often with a change of hair arrangement, dancing and performing gymnastic exercises. It even stood on Madame Bizon's hand some of the time, but usually on the hand of the medium Eva. In the sittings of Madame Ignath, small heads the size of walnuts and very beautiful materialized in glasses of water. The spirit-controlled Nona gave the opinion that they were materialized plastic thought forms. Partial materializations, such as heads and hands, have often been seen to be only a fraction of normal size. G. Materialized clothing. Very few of the temporarily materialized spirits have come without clothing. Harry Price, most carefully and skeptical of the SPR investigators, in a recent book tells of the periodic materialization of a little girl unclothed. In dark seances held by her mother and a few friends, one a good medium, attending such a seance, Price found the bare little body, warm, solid, of normal weight in his hands. The child spoke a few words in answer to a question. The floor of the room had been sprinkled with white powder, the openings sealed, and all precautions taken against fraud. No footprints crossed the powdered floor, and no seals were broken, satisfying Price of the genuineness of the materialization. On the other hand, spirits clothe themselves in materials ranging from misty gray vapors to clothes so solid that pieces of it have repeatedly been cut off by investigators to study after dematerialization of spirit and garb. A peculiarity of the materialized fabric is that it is nearly always lighter and finer than original would be the case. Sylvan J. Muldoon, famous for his practice and reports on astral travel, writes of once seeing clothing forming itself around his astral body when it had left the physical body but a few feet. The clothing was identical to that on his living body, which lay recumbent on his bed. Not only do the bodies of mediums dematerialize partly or completely at materializing seances on occasion, but sometimes their clothing also vanishes for the time being, though at other times it is left behind. Usually the cloth materialized at a seance remains white, even if the vanishing clothing of the medium is black. Katie King, a spirit who frequently materialized at Miss Florence Cook's seances and was much studied by Sir William Crookes, often allowed the fabric of her ghostly clothing to be examined. Sometimes she cut as many as a dozen pieces from the bottom of her skirt and handed them to sitters to be examined. The holes in the skirt immediately closed up as the sitters watched. Most of this fabric vanished when the phantom materialized, but a few pieces were rendered enduring, in which case similar holes were found cut in the skirt of the medium after the seance ended, tending to show that the material of her skirt had been borrowed for materialization purposes and that it was not returned when pieces were rendered permanent. In passing, it must be noted that the fabric of the ghostly garment was not like that of the skirt in which a hole had been left. It is thus seen that it is possible to transform matter through the process of dematerialization and materialization, changing one thing to another and rendering the changed part permanent, as must be done in instant healing if the Kahuna theory is correct. Katie King said that in making bits of drapery permanent, she was forced to take away permanently some of the medium's vitality. Check the Kahuna theory that all materializing operations involve the use of vital force of the living, and so weakening her. This material, when presented to drapers with the request that it be matched, proved to be nothing like in the market. The drapers expressed the opinion that it might be the cloth of Chinese manufacture. A piece of Yolanda's spirit dress was torn off and made permanent at a sitting with Madame d'Esperance in Christiania. A similar hole, partly torn and partly cut, appeared later in the medium skirt. The piece from the spirit skirt was several times larger. but of exactly the same shape. The fabric was white and much lighter in texture, being almost as thin as gauze, but composed of definitely woven threads. Some materialized fabric has been found not to be woven. It resembles filmy sheets of material, slightly like rubber, often filled with holes to make it appear like lace. At a sitting with George Spriggs in Cardiff, a piece of the rich, bright red silk girdle of a materialized spirit form was cut off and left behind. It soon faded, but at a later seance, when called to the attention of the same spirit, was restored to its original color and luster in some unexplained way. Locks of hair cut from the heads of materialized spirits and left behind as permanent or as slowly vanishing souvenirs have in almost all cases been found to be softer and finer than the hair of the medium through whose seance the apparition was enabled to materialize. H. Materialization of the little people. Fairies and other little people seem to materialize in visible and even tangible forms at times, most often in the presence of children. Around the year 1915, two young girls in England used their father's camera to get pictures of fairies and gnomes. The pictures were published and quite a stir created. A better camera was provided and more pictures obtained. The charge of the suspicious that the negatives could have been faked was never proved. In Hawaii, there is a belief in the gnomes or menehunes, these materializing at times and resembling the brownies of other lands. During my stay in Honolulu, the papers were filled with accounts and comments after school children discovered one of the little men on the playground and followed him excitedly until he took fright and escaped from them by diving under a building set a few feet off the ground. He seemed to disappear into thin air under the building. The teacher, hearing the shouts, came on the scene and questioned the children. They all told the same story and described the little man in the same way. The menehunes were credited with the building of many stone walls to enclose arms of the shallow sea and act as artificial fish ponds. In native folklore, a variety of such little people receive mention. While the evidence of the materialization of elves, fairies, gnomes, and their like is poorly verified, it would seem to be a mistake not to mention the possibility of their reality in listing the materials of the study at this point. Comment. Several things need to be especially noted in the above cases. The shock which rendered the doctor unconscious when he seized an apparition at one of Mirabelli's seances indicates the electrical factor involved in materialization. Many investigators have studied the evidence of electrical vital or psychic force at work during materialization and have found it very real, even if its function was not fully understood. Spirits of the dead give contradictory opinions as to the nature and use of the force, some saying it was drawn from the brain of medium or sitters, others saying it comes from their bodies, and still others saying it is present in the atmosphere and is only to be collected. Modern studies by medical men have proved that when the electrical vital body electricity or mind electricity or both are exhausted in a living person, unconsciousness results. This agrees with the Kahuna belief that all consciousness functions only when there is at hand a proper amount of vital force of the necessary voltage. Remember that they believe that the low self makes the vital force from foods we eat, and the middle self takes this low voltage force and steps up its voltage for its use in will, and that the high self takes the force and steps up its voltage for the highest voltage, in which condition it becomes similar to the atom smashing voltages known to science. The vitality of mediums and sitters at seances has often been depleted by materializations. The famous medium D.D. Home was sometimes left lying almost unconscious on the floor after such a seance. One investigator, F.W.H. Myers, was so depleted after a seance that he went to bed for 2 days. Mediums frequently have been forced to take long rest periods between sittings. The Kahunas, in their healing practices, watched for the danger of the theft of vital force from the living by the dead. While doctors do not recognize such possibilities at the present time, it is evident, in the light of the long study of the Kahuna lore, that some illness is directly caused by such theft of vital force. The doctors do, however, know that when vital force falls below par in the individual, the control of the conscious mind over the subconscious is greatly weakened, causing thought impressions to enter the subconscious without being subjected to the usual process of judgment by reason, causing unreasonable complexes or fixations. We have seen that shock impressions are dangerous when one is very tired or vitality is low because of illness or strain. That if, for some reason, the normal supply of vital force continues for some time to fall, depressive states come, and, at more advanced stages, insanity results. While medical men make no mention of the rest of the usual story, the patient, once insanity becomes pronounced, seems no longer to suffer so greatly from lack of vital force. Often there is violent physical action, indicating that the Kahunas were right in thinking that the spirits of the dead often obsess the living, beginning by stealing vital force and ending by pushing out the resident pair of spirits and taking over the body for themselves, thus accomplishing a form of rising from the dead for themselves. Doctors frown on the idea, but when they administer insulin shock or electrical shock to cure the insane, they are doing nothing more or less than the physicians of early times when they made the stay of obsessing spirits so painful in the body of the insane patient that the invaders left, allowing the rightful owners of the body to return. The passage of matter through matter in materialization is demonstrated when apports and even bodies of large animals and men are dematerialized and brought through closed and sealed doors to be materialized in the seance room. This indicates the fact that in the materialized state, physical substance is sufficiently thin to pass through wood and other not too dense substances. Glass seems too dense to allow such passage of thin materials or shadowy body molds through it. It is not necessary for the spirit of a dead person to materialize in denser form in order to carry vital force with it. Also, dematerialized physical substances need not be solidified to the visible state to be used as an invisible hand in moving solid objects, providing there is enough vital force lodged in the invisible ectoplasmic substance used by the spirit. A case illustrating this came under my observation. A young man was to arrive by plane and have dinner with his sweetheart and her mother. The plane crashed and he was killed in the landing. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang at the house he had intended to visit. The sweetheart answered the bell but found no one there. The bell rang 3 times, the mother joining the girl in trying to learn who had caused the ringing. Some months later, at a seance, the young man communicated through a medium saying that he had not been aware of his death and had gone to the home where he had been expected. He rang the bell 3 times, being greatly surprised and agitated to find that he was not seen or recognized by his friends. He failed after the 3rd to be able to press the button. Vital force evidently expanded, and concluded that something was very wrong. All the evidence accumulated by the study of hundreds of cases of haunting and poltergeist phenomena indicates that the Kahunas were right in believing that the spirits of the dead can store large amounts of vital force and in the shadowy body of the low self. At the moment of sudden death, the shadowy body is charged with vital force and seems to remain charged and ready to ring bells and do other kinds of work until the charge is exhausted. The poltergeist, being usually a low self cut off from his middle self after death and given to childish antics, steals vital force from the living and uses it to move solid objects or make noises. The shadowy body appears to be an excellent storage body for vital force, and when heavily charged, may become sufficiently solid to be used to move material objects. A small amount of ectoplasmic material of the invisible and very thin grade may be needed to stiffen the shadowy body. Later, study may show whether or not this is true. In cases where animals materialize at seances, one can only conclude that high selves are present and doing the work. If the spirits of the dead disagree so largely on how materialization is accomplished, so showing that they are ignorant of the part played by the high selves, it stands to reason that animals would not have sufficient intelligence to cause a materialization for themselves. One more thing should be kept in mind. The materials of a supposedly living and fleshly nature used in forming ectoplasm with which to materialize animals, birds, and insects cannot be said to come from the medium and sitters, It must be found in other quarters by the high selves and borrowed for temporary use. In fact, materializations have often been observed when no visible material was drawn from either medium or sitters, although the expenditure of vital force from this circle is very usual. In the blacker phases of the ceremonial magic, it is comparable that the vital force of sacrificed animals, or even humans, was taken and used by spirits. But it is to be concluded that the high selves would never use vital force or the bodily materials of sacrificial victims. The Kahuna name for the high self was entirely trustworthy parental self, and there seems to be no question as to its aversion to cruelty. With the end of this chapter, I finished the work of presenting the basic elements in the theories of Huna, together with some of the proofs derived from comparison with the findings of psychic science and psychologies, also, to a lesser extent, various religious beliefs. End of chapter. If you haven't done so, please do hit the like button. If you know of anyone that's interested in this topic, please do share it with them. Leave me a comment, let me know you were here, subscribe to the channel as we go on to the next video where we're going to learn more of these Kahuna ways, the life-giving secrets of Lomi Lomi and laying on of hands.